Why was she even there? 800 meters above the chaos, Staff Sergeant Ariella Kane pressed her body against the cold mountain stone and asked herself that question for the 100th time. Through the scope of her custom M210 ESR, she watched 12 men fighting for their lives in the valley below. SEAL Team 9. Good soldiers. The best, actually. But right now they were surrounded, outgunned, and running out of time. She wasn't supposed to care. Her orders were carved in stone, typed in classified documents she'd memorized word for word. Observe. Report. Do not engage. Ghost site operatives didn't fire shots. They didn't leave traces. They didn't exist. 6 hours she'd been in position, her ghillie suit breaking up her outline against the scree, rendering her invisible to anyone who didn't know exactly where to look. 6 hours of watching, waiting, breathing slow and measured, while the world below her moved like pieces on a chessboard she couldn't touch. The gunfire tore through the valley like fabric ripping, sharp, violent, desperate. She watched Sergeant First Class Connor Hayes press against a boulder as dirt exploded inches from his face. Watched Lieutenant Marcus Webb shout something she couldn't hear over the distance and the wind. Counted the muzzle flashes from enemy positions on 3 separate ridgelines. Professional fighters, too many. Too organized. This wasn't the light resistance the intelligence briefing had promised. This was an ambush. Someone had known they were coming. Ariella's finger rested alongside the trigger guard. Not on it. Not yet. The radio crackled in her ear. Fragments of desperate voices bleeding through the static. Contact rear. Multiple hostiles. They're flanking left. We're surrounded. She knew what came next. She'd seen it before. Watched good men die because she'd followed orders instead of her instinct. Her jaw tightened. Her breathing stayed controlled, professional, but inside something was breaking. She thought of Jackson. Always Jackson, her spotter, her friend. The man who'd bled out in her arms 2 years ago in the Hindu Kush because she'd stayed silent when she knew the route was compromised. She'd been a good soldier that day. Jackson had died a good soldier's death. The kind they pin medals on coffins for. Through her scope she watched the enemy commander move into view, tall, tactical gear, directing his fighters with hand signals, organizing a final push. 90 seconds, maybe less, and those 12 men would be overrun. 12 letters home to families. 12 flag-draped coffins. 12 names carved into stone. Her finger moved to the trigger. Wind speed 8 miles per hour. Cross breeze from the northeast. Temperature 42 degrees. Humidity low. Distance to target 760 meters. She'd made harder shots, but she'd never made one that would cost her everything. Break protocol and Ghost Site would disavow her existence entirely. Her career, her identity, everything she'd built. Gone, but those men were dying. Not again, she whispered to the mountain. Not ever again. The first shot came from nowhere. One moment the enemy commander was raising his rifle to signal the assault. The next, his head snapped back and he crumpled like a puppet with cut strings. The crack of her rifle reached them a heartbeat later, echoing off the valley walls. She'd crossed a line. There was no going back now, so she didn't try. Her hands moved with practiced precision. Bolt back. Brass ejecting in a golden arc. New round chambering, target acquired. The machine gunner who'd been shredding the SEAL's cover dropped mid-burst, his weapon clattering against rock. She displaced immediately. Never stay still. Ghost lesson number 1. 3 shots from position alpha, then she was moving. Low, crawling across the scree, her ghillie suit snagging on rocks, sweat soaking her base layer despite the mountain cold. Position Bravo, 4 more shots. A spotter directing mortar fire, an enemy fighter attempting to flank. Each one calculated, each one necessary, each one another nail in the coffin of her old life. Down in the valley, Hayes froze. That wasn't friendly fire from their position. The angle was all wrong. He pressed his radio, his voice cutting through static. Any station, this is Hammer 1. Are we receiving fire support? Over. The response came broken and confused. Hammer 1, negative. No assets on your grid. Say again. So it wasn't official. Someone was helping them off the books. Hayes tracked the incoming fire pattern through his optics. The shots originated from multiple positions on the northern ridge, but the timing was impossible. Too precise. Too fast. Either they had a whole sniper team up there, or one impossibly skilled shooter who could displace and re-engage faster than anyone he'd ever seen. Another shot dropped an enemy fighter at 700 meters. Perfect center mass. No wasted motion. "That's not luck," Hayes muttered to Webb. "That's art." Ariella moved like water flowing downhill. Smooth. Inevitable, following the path of least resistance. Position Charlie. Position Delta. Never the same place twice. Her rifle felt like it weighed 50 pounds after 6 hours of motionless observation, but her hands remained steady. They always did. That's what made her valuable. What made her a ghost. What made her alone. She identified targets by priority. Leaders first. Heavy weapons second. Anyone coordinating group movement third. The enemy force was well trained, but their communication was breaking down. They'd expected an easy kill, not a fight against an invisible opponent, not someone who could shoot like she could. Through her scope, she watched the SEAL team begin to reorganize. They were professionals, using the confusion to redistribute ammunition, tighten their defensive perimeter. Good. They'd survive another 10 minutes if she could keep the pressure off. But the enemy had artillery, and they'd start using it soon. She keyed her concealed radio to the emergency frequency, knowing it would blow her ghost sight cover completely. Every word she spoke was another bridge burning behind her. "Hammer 1, this is Overwatch. You have approximately 8 minutes before they call fire missions on your position. Recommend immediate displacement northeast, bearing 045, 200 meters. There's a wadi that'll give you hard cover." Silence on the other end. Then Hayes' voice, cautious and professional. "Overwatch, identify yourself." Negative, she almost smiled. "Move now or you're all dead. Overwatch out." She didn't wait for a response. Her scope swept back to the valley floor, finding the enemy radio operator crouched behind a boulder. The man was speaking rapidly into his handset, almost certainly calling for indirect fire. Distance, 820 meters. Elevated position. Wind would push her shot 3 inches right at this range. She adjusted, exhaled halfway, held it. The trigger broke clean. The radio operator's call for artillery died with him. But she'd made a mistake, a small one, the kind that gets you killed. The enemy commander's replacement was smarter than his predecessor. Instead of exposing himself, he sent runners between positions, communicating by hand signal rather than radio. Within minutes, Ariella saw the shift in their tactics. They stopped trying to assault the SEAL team. Instead, they began moving in a new pattern. Half maintaining pressure on the valley floor, while the others turned toward the northern ridge. Toward her. "They're coming," she whispered to herself. She'd bought the SEALs time, maybe enough time, but she'd also painted a target on her own back. And unlike those 12 men in the valley, she was completely alone. Or so she thought. What do you do when someone saves your life? Hayes saw it through his optics. Enemy fighters breaking off from the main force, beginning a cautious advance up the mountainside, moving in fire teams, covering each other's movement, using terrain intelligently. "They're going after whoever's helping us," Webb said, his voice tight with understanding. Hayes made a decision in the space between heartbeats, the kind of decision that defines who you are when the rules don't have answers. "We're going after them." Webb stared at him. "Sir, we barely have enough ammo to hold this position. If we leave cover, if we push up that mountain." He didn't finish. He didn't have to. They both knew the math. 12 men, low on ammunition. Enemy force still numbering 40, maybe 50. It was tactically insane. Hayes checked his magazine. 17 rounds. "That's why we're doing it," he said quietly. "Whoever's up there just burned their whole world to save ours. We don't leave them behind." The team moved fast. Not running, that would get them killed, but with the controlled urgency of men who understood that seconds mattered. They used the terrain the way their training had drilled into them. Bound and overwatch. Cover and movement, professional, precise. But underneath the training, underneath the tactics, there was something else. Something that had nothing to do with orders or doctrine. There was honor. 800 meters above them, Ariella was calculating her own survival. She had maybe 20 rounds left. Her emergency beacon was in her pack, but calling for extraction would take time she didn't have. The enemy was advancing in 3 separate elements. Smart. They'd learned from watching their people die. They weren't exposing themselves to long-range fire anymore. They were coming for her in close. She shifted position again, moving to the edge of a small cliff that gave her overwatch on 2 of the approaching elements. Her shoulder screamed. She'd been in the same prone position for hours, and the adrenaline was starting to wear off, leaving behind the reality of muscle strain and dehydration and exhaustion. But her hands stayed steady. They always did. The first element came into view 300 meters below her position. 6 men. Moving carefully through the rocks, she let them come closer. Ammunition was precious now. Every shot had to count. 250 meters, 200. At 150, she took her shot. The point man dropped. His team scattered, diving for cover, and she displaced before they could triangulate her position. Position echo, a different angle, a different target. The second element was trying to flank, thinking she'd committed to the first position. They were wrong. She caught them in the open, transitioning between cover. 2 shots, 2 targets. Then she was moving again, her legs burning, her breath coming harder than before. How long could she keep this up? She didn't let herself think about the answer. Hayes and his team hit the first enemy element from behind. The fighters had been so focused on the mountain above them, on the sniper who'd been decimating their force, that they never expected the assault from below. The firefight was short and brutal. Hayes moved through it with the cold efficiency of 15 years of combat. Target, shoot, move, target, shoot, move. But in the back of his mind, one thought kept repeating, hold on, just hold on. Ariella heard the new gunfire and understood immediately what was happening. They were coming for her. Those 12 men she'd never met. They were risking everything to reach her. The realization hit her harder than she expected. She'd spent 2 years convinced that working alone was the only way to avoid losing anyone else. That distance was safety. That caring was weakness. But those men were climbing toward her anyway. She keyed her radio. Hammer 1, this is Overwatch. You need to fall back, your primary mission is compromised. Recommend immediate. Hayes cut her off. Overwatch, shut up and keep shooting. We're coming to get you. Something broke in her chest. Something she'd kept carefully locked away for 2 years. She switched her scope to the third enemy element. They were the closest. Maybe 70 meters from her position now, too close for long-range work. She slung her rifle and pulled her sidearm. A Glock 19. 15 rounds. Not much against 6 trained fighters, but it would have to be enough. They came over the ridgeline in a coordinated rush, exactly the way she would have done it. Textbook tactics. She dropped the first 2 before they even saw her. The third got a shot off that sparked against the rock 6 inches from her head. She put 2 rounds center mass and he went down. The remaining 3 took cover, started maneuvering, professional, patient. They'd learned. Ariella's shoulder was on fire now. Every movement sent lightning through her body. She'd pushed it too far, done too much. But she wasn't done yet. She shifted position, trying to get an angle on the fighters pinning her down, and that's when she felt it. A sharp, hot pain in her side. She looked down. Blood, not a lot, not yet, but enough to know she'd been hit. Enough to know the clock was running faster than before. Hayes heard the change in the gunfire pattern. Pistol shots, close range, his blood went cold. Webb, he said, his voice tight, double time, now. They pushed harder, up the mountain, through the rocks, every muscle burning, every breath cutting like glass. Behind them, the rest of the enemy force was regrouping, trying to organize a pursuit, but Hayes didn't care about them. He cared about the person who'd saved his team, the person who was dying alone on a mountain. Ariella's vision was starting to blur at the edges. Blood loss, shock. She'd seen it enough times to recognize the signs. She took another shot, missed. That never happened. Her hands were shaking now. One of the enemy fighters saw it, saw her weakness. He moved forward, confident now, ready to finish this. She raised her pistol, tried to steady her aim, but her hands wouldn't cooperate. This is how it ends, she thought. Not in some glorious last stand, just bleeding out on a mountain because she'd finally cared about something enough to break the rules. Jackson would have laughed. The fighter was 10 meters away. Raising his rifle, she could see his face. Young, maybe 25, someone's son, someone's brother. She pulled the trigger. The shot went wide. He didn't. But before his finger could complete the squeeze, before the bullet could leave his rifle, Hayes came over the ridgeline like a freight train. 3 shots, fast, precise. The fighter dropped. Hayes was already moving to Ariella, his rifle up, scanning for additional threats. Webb and 2 others fanned out, securing the immediate area. The rest of the team set up a defensive perimeter. Hayes dropped beside her, his eyes taking in the wound, the blood, the pallor of her skin. "Hey," he said, his voice steady despite everything. "We really need to stop meeting like this." She tried to laugh. It came out as a cough. "You're insane," she managed, "coming up here, risking your whole team." "Yeah, well," he pulled medical supplies from his kit. "You saved us first." Seemed rude not to return the favor. His hands worked quickly. Pressure dressing, hemostatic gauze, the bleeding slowed, not stopped, but slowed enough maybe. "What's your name?" he asked, trying to keep her focused, keep her talking. "Ariella," she whispered, "Staff Sergeant, Ghost Sight." "Well, Ariella, I'm Hayes, and you're going to be fine." She looked at him, really looked at him, saw the determination in his eyes, the refusal to accept any other outcome, and she wanted to believe him. But she'd seen too many people die to believe in miracles. Have you ever felt yourself disappearing? Ariella's world had narrowed to a small circle of sensations, the pressure of Hayes' hands against her wound, the cold of the mountain seeping through her gear, the distant sound of gunfire as the SEAL team held off the enemy force below. Everything else was fading, going soft at the edges like a photograph left too long in the sun. She'd read about this, studied it in combat medicine courses. Hypovolemic shock, the body shutting down non-essential systems to preserve the core, to buy time for rescue that might not come. Her lips were numb, her fingers tingling, classic signs. Hayes was talking to someone on the radio, his voice urgent but controlled. She caught fragments. Immediate CASEVAC, combat injury, female, gunshot wound to the torso. He looked down at her, his eyes meeting hers. "Stay with me, Ariella. Extraction is 10 minutes out." 10 minutes. She'd bled out in less during training scenarios, but she didn't tell him that. Webb appeared at Hayes' shoulder, his rifle pointed down the mountain. "Enemies pulling back, sir. They're regrouping, probably calling for their own reinforcements." "How long do we have?" Hayes asked. 15 minutes, maybe 20 if we're lucky. Hayes did the math. Extraction in 10, enemy returning in 15. It would be close, too close. "We hold this position," he said. "Nothing gets through." Webb nodded and moved back to the perimeter. Hayes kept pressure on her wound, his hands steady despite the chaos around them. "You did good work today," he said quietly. "Saved a lot of lives." Ariella tried to respond, but her voice wouldn't cooperate. She wanted to tell him about Ghost Sight, about the orders she'd broken, about the life she'd just destroyed. But the words stayed trapped somewhere between her brain and her mouth. He seemed to understand anyway. "Whatever happens after this," he said, "you made the right call. Don't let anyone tell you different." She managed a small nod, tried to focus on his face. to anchor herself to something real, something solid, but the edges kept blurring, the world kept fading. And then she heard it, the distant thump of helicopter rotors. The Black Hawk came in fast and low, the pilot pushing the limits of what was safe in the thin mountain air. Hayes grabbed Ariella, lifting her as carefully as he could. She gasped. The movement sent fresh waves of agony through her body, but they were moving, toward the helicopter, toward survival. The SEAL team provided covering fire, disciplined bursts, aimed shots, making every round count. Webb was the last one to the bird, running backward, his rifle never stopping. Hayes pulled him inside and the helicopter banked hard, gaining altitude, putting distance between them and the mountain. Ariella lay on the deck, a medic working over her, IV in her arm, oxygen mask on her face. She could feel the cold saline flowing into her veins, could feel her heart responding, beating stronger, steadier. Maybe she wouldn't die today after all. Maybe. Hayes sat beside her, his hand on her shoulder. The good one, not saying anything, just being there. Present, she found his eyes again, tried to communicate everything she couldn't say out loud. The gratitude, the confusion, the question that kept circling in her mind. Why would you come back for me? He seemed to understand that one too, because that's what we do, he said simply. We don't leave people behind. The flight to the forward operating base took 20 minutes. Ariella drifted in and out of consciousness. Sometimes she heard voices, Hayes talking to the medic, the pilot calling out altitude and airspeed, Webb checking ammunition counts, normal sounds, routine sounds, the sounds of people who trusted each other. The sounds of a team. She'd forgotten what that felt like. The hospital at the FOB was a blur, bright lights, cold tables, people in scrubs moving with practiced efficiency. Someone cut away her gear, her ghillie suit, the layers of clothing beneath, exposing the wound, the damage, the truth of what those bullets had done. A surgeon appeared, young, confident. This is going to hurt, he said, but we'll get you through it. She believed him, or maybe she just didn't have the energy left to doubt. The surgery took 3 hours. They removed the bullet, repaired the damage to her liver, transfused 2 units of blood. When she woke up, the first thing she saw was white ceiling tiles, fluorescent lights. The second thing she saw was Hayes sitting in a chair beside her bed. He looked exhausted, still in his combat gear, dried blood on his hands, her blood. You stayed, she said. Her voice was rough, scratchy, like she'd been screaming. Maybe she had. Wanted to make sure you made it, he replied. He leaned forward, elbows on his knees. How you feeling? Like I got shot. He almost smiled. That's fair. The doctors say you'll make a full recovery, 6 weeks, maybe 8. You got lucky. Lucky, she thought about that word, thought about all the choices that had led to this moment. I broke protocol, she said quietly. Ghost sight will bury me for this. My career is over. Hayes was quiet for a moment. Then your career as a ghost, maybe, but that doesn't mean it's over, just different. She didn't understand, didn't have the energy to ask, but something in his tone made her think he had a plan, something he wasn't saying yet. Rest, he said, standing. We can talk about the future when you're stronger. He paused at the door. For what it's worth, Ariella, what you did today, that took real courage, not the kind they teach in training, the kind that comes from here. He tapped his chest, over his heart. Then he was gone. And Ariella was alone with her thoughts, with the reality of what she'd done, the life she'd left behind, the uncertainty ahead. But underneath all of it there was something new, something fragile and unfamiliar. There was hope. Not the desperate kind that comes from wishing things were different. The quiet kind that comes from knowing that change is possible, that maybe, just maybe, she didn't have to be alone anymore. She closed her eyes and let sleep take her, dreamless, deep, the kind of sleep that comes after surviving something you weren't supposed to survive. And for the first time in 2 years, she didn't dream of Jackson. What does it mean to belong somewhere? 3 days passed in the hospital. 3 days of antibiotics and pain medication and physical therapy that made her shoulder scream. 3 days of debriefings and reports and carefully worded statements to officers who looked at her like she was a problem they didn't know how to solve. Ghost Site didn't send anyone, didn't call, didn't acknowledge her existence at all. She'd known they wouldn't. That was the deal. Break protocol and you're on your own. But knowing it and living it were different things. In the quiet moments between medications, when the hospital was still and the only sound was the beep of monitors, she felt the weight of that abandonment. She'd given them everything, her skills, her loyalty, her identity, and they'd erased her without a second thought. On the fourth day, Hayes came back. He looked better, cleaned up, fresh uniform, but his eyes still carried that weight, that knowing. "You look like hell," he said, pulling up the chair beside her bed. "Thanks, you're really good at this, comforting the wounded thing." He grinned. "I try. How's the shoulder?" "Hurts, but I'll live." She studied his face. "You didn't come here just to check on me." "No." He pulled out a folder, set it on the table beside her bed. "I came to talk about what happens next." She looked at the folder but didn't touch it. "What is there to talk about? Ghost Site is done with me. I'm probably looking at a dishonorable discharge. Best case, I get shuffled to some desk job where I can't cause any more problems." Hayes shook his head. "That's one possibility, but there are others." "Like what?" "Like coming to work with us, with SEAL Team 9. She stared at him, waiting for the punchline. It didn't come. "You're serious?" "Completely." He leaned back in the chair. "Look, I've been doing this job for 15 years. I've worked with the best snipers in the military. Marine Corps Scout snipers, Army Rangers, Delta. I've seen them all." He paused. "You're better." "Flattery doesn't work on me." "It's not flattery, it's assessment." He tapped the folder. "I've already talked to command. They're willing to bring you into our support structure. Sniper specialty, full integration into the team, but the decision has to be yours." Ariella felt something shift in her chest, like a door opening that she'd kept locked for years. "Why?" she asked quietly. "Why would you want someone like me? I broke orders, went rogue. I'm not exactly a team player." "No." Hayes met her eyes. "You're someone who did the right thing when the rules said otherwise. You're someone who risked everything to save people you'd never met. And then when we came for you, when you were bleeding out on that mountain, you tried to send us away. Tried to keep us safe even when you were dying." He stood, walked to the window, looked out at the base beyond. "That's not someone I'm worried about. That's someone I want on my team, someone I trust." The words hung in the air, heavy, real. "Trust?" When was the last time anyone had said that to her? "I work alone," she said. "It's safer that way for everyone." "You did work alone." Hayes turned back to her. "But maybe you don't have to anymore. Maybe the best way to honor Jackson is to make sure no one else dies because you stayed silent. And you can't do that from the shadows." She flinched. "How did you know about Jackson?" "I didn't, not the details, but I know that look, that weight." He gestured vaguely. "The one that says you're carrying someone who's gone. We all have it, every one of us. The question is what you do with it." Ariella looked down at her hands, at the IV still taped to her arm, at the bandages wrapped around her shoulder. She'd spent 2 years running from connection, from risk, from the possibility of loss. She'd convinced herself that isolation was strength, that distance was safety. But sitting in that hospital bed, listening to Hayes offer her something she didn't deserve, she realized something. She'd been wrong. Strength wasn't shutting people out, it was letting them in. Safety wasn't avoiding attachment, it was finding people worth fighting for, worth dying for, worth living for. "I have conditions," she said finally. Hayes raised an eyebrow. "I'm listening." "I keep my rifle, I choose my own positions, and if I call a threat, people listen." "Done, done, and absolutely done. Anything else?" "Yeah." She met his eyes. "If I do this, I do it all the way. No halfway, No holding back. I become part of this team for real, because that's the only way it works. That's the only way I'd want it. He offered his hand. Welcome to Team 9, Staff Sergeant Kane. She shook it, and for the first time in 2 years, the grip didn't feel like a farewell. It felt like a beginning. The paperwork took another week. Transfer requests, medical clearances, security authorizations, all the bureaucratic machinery that transformed her from ghost to soldier again, from operator without a country to member of SEAL Team 9. Hayes visited every day, sometimes with Webb, sometimes with other members of the team. They didn't push, didn't demand anything, just showed up, talked about missions and training and the terrible coffee in the mess hall, normal things, human things. Things that reminded her what she'd been missing. When the doctors finally cleared her for light duty, Hayes drove her to the beach in Virginia where the team trained. It was early morning, the sun just starting to paint the sky gold and red. The team was running PT, 6 miles at a brutal pace. She watched them move in synchronized precision. A unit, a family. Hayes jogged over, barely winded despite the run. You came. I said I'd think about it. She gestured at the team. Doesn't mean I've decided. Of course not. He handed her the official transfer packet, same folder from the hospital, but now it was filled out, approved, waiting only for her signature. Command already signed off. It's your call now. She took the folder, opened it, looked at the signature line waiting for her decision. Why me? She asked again. You could get any sniper in the military. Because you're not any sniper. Hayes looked out at the ocean. I've worked with the best operators in the world, but I've never seen anyone make the choices you made on that mountain. The tactical decisions were brilliant, but more than that, you chose to risk everything to save people you'd never met. That's not training. That's character. Or stupidity. Sometimes there's not much difference. He turned back to her. Look, I'm not going to pressure you. You've earned the right to make your own choice, but I will say this. Jackson would be proud of what you did up there, and I think maybe it's time to stop punishing yourself for the one time you followed orders instead of your gut. The words hit her like a physical blow. She'd spent 2 years avoiding that thought, that possibility, that forgiveness. Webb jogged over, stopping beside Hayes. He'd been there on the mountain, had seen everything. Ma'am, he said formally. Then with a slight smile, we could use someone who shoots like that. Gets boring just being good at stuff when we could watch someone be great. Flattery doesn't work on me. Wasn't flattery, was just facts. More of the team were finishing their run, gathering at the water's edge. A few waved. She recognized faces from the mountain, men she'd protected from an impossible position, men who'd climbed up to help her when they could have escaped, men who'd become her people without her permission. Ariella looked down at the folder again, at the signature line, at the transformation it represented. She thought about lonely vigils on cold mountains, about watching through scopes while life happened somewhere else, about the weight of responsibility without the balance of connection. She thought about Jackson, who'd always said she was the best shooter he'd ever seen, but the worst teammate, because she never let anyone close enough to help. She pulled out a pen and signed her name. Can you really start over? The first week with Team 9 was harder than any mission Ariella had ever run, not physically. The training was intense, but she'd done intense before. It was the being part of something that threw her, the constant presence of other people, the expectation of trust, the vulnerability that came with letting others see her weaknesses. She'd forgotten how exhausting it was to be human. Hayes started her slow, light workouts to rebuild her shoulder, range time to verify her zero, tactical refreshers to learn the team's procedures and protocols. She absorbed it all with the focused intensity that had made her a ghost, but underneath there was resistance, old habits fighting against new patterns. Webb noticed first. He usually did. You're holding back, he said one afternoon at the range. They were running partner drills, covering each other's movements, basic stuff, but Ariella kept creating distance, pulling away. "I'm doing what you asked." "No, you're doing the minimum required. There's a difference." He lowered his rifle. "Look, I get it. You've been solo for a long time, but on a team we need more than compliance. We need commitment." She wanted to argue, to defend herself, but the words wouldn't come because he was right. That night Hayes found her on the beach. She'd been watching the waves, thinking about Jackson, about the choices that had led her here. "Mind if I sit?" he asked. "It's your beach." He sat anyway. Silence stretched between them, comfortable, not demanding. Finally he spoke. "You know what the hardest part of this job is? Getting shot at." He smiled. "That's maybe third or fourth. No, the hardest part is trusting other people with your life, really trusting them, not just hopping they'll be there, knowing they will be." Ariella watched the waves. "I trusted Jackson. He died." "Yeah," Hayes' voice was soft, "and that's going to happen again. Maybe not soon, maybe not for years, but eventually if you do this long enough you lose people. That's the cost." He paused. "But the alternative is going through life alone, never letting anyone in, never risking anything. And that's not living, that's just surviving." She thought about that, about the 2 years she'd spent in the shadows, about the missions where she'd watched other people's lives through a scope, always at a distance, always separate. It had been safe, but it had also been empty. "I don't know if I can do this," she admitted. "Be part of something again." Hayes stood, brushed sand from his pants. "Then don't think about the whole thing, just think about tomorrow, about showing up, about trying. And then the day after that, do it again. Eventually it becomes who you are instead of who you're trying to be." He walked away, left her alone with her thoughts and the sound of the ocean. She stayed there until dawn. The breakthrough came 3 weeks later. They were running a live fire exercise, team assault on a simulated compound. Ariella was providing overwatch from an elevated position 600 meters out. Her job was simple: cover the team's approach, engage any threats they couldn't handle. It started normally. The team moved in, breached the door, cleared the first room. But then the scenario controller threw in a variable: additional hostiles appearing from a concealed position, flanking the team. Ariella saw it immediately, calculated the angles, the timing, but something held her back. Old instincts, ghost training, don't expose yourself, don't commit. In that hesitation, Webb took a simulated hit, paint round to the chest. He went down. The exercise ended. The team gathered for debrief. Webb was fine, it was just training, but Ariella felt the weight of it anyway. Saw the same scenario playing out for real. Saw him bleeding, dying, because she'd hesitated. Hayes didn't say anything during the debrief, didn't call her out, didn't criticize, but after, when the others had left, he pulled her aside. "Talk to me," he said. And she did, told him about the fear, the doubt, the voice in her head that said caring about people meant losing them. That distance was the only protection against loss. Hayes listened without interrupting. When she finished, he nodded slowly. "You're right," he said. "Caring about people means you can lose them. That's real, that's valid, but here's what you're missing." He gestured toward the team. "Those men out there, they're going to lose people too. Maybe lose you, but they show up anyway. They risk it anyway, because the alternative is going through life alone." He put his hand on her shoulder, the one that was healing. "You saved our lives on that mountain, but we saved yours too, not just pulling you off that ridge, but by showing you that it's okay to need people, to let them in, to risk the pain because the connection is worth it." Something broke inside her then, not in a bad way, more like ice cracking, letting warmth through. The next day they ran the same exercise, same scenario, same variables, but when the flanking hostiles appeared, Ariella didn't hesitate. She engaged immediately, dropped 3 targets in 4 seconds, gave the team the time they needed to reposition and respond. Webb gave her a thumbs up from the compound. She returned it. It was a small moment, insignificant in the grand scheme, but it felt like crossing a line, like stepping from one world into another. That night the team went to a local bar, tradition after a successful training week. Ariella almost didn't go, old habits, but Hayes gave her a look, and she went. They sat around a table, drinking beer, telling stories. The conversation flowed around her like water, not demanding her participation, just including her in its current. Webb made a joke about her shooting. Someone else countered with a story about his own worst miss. Laughter rolled through the group, genuine, unforced. Ariella found herself smiling, then laughing. The sound felt strange, rusty but good. Hayes caught her eye across the table, raised his beer in a silent toast. She raised hers back. Later, walking back to base, Webb fell in step beside her. "You did good today," he said. "Not just the shooting, the whole thing." "Thanks. I know it's not easy, the trust thing." He glanced at her. "But for what it's worth, we're glad you're here." She didn't know what to say to that, so she just nodded. But inside, something was changing. The walls she'd built, the distance she'd maintained, they were still there, but they were lower now, thinner, and maybe eventually they'd disappear altogether. Maybe she could belong somewhere after all. What does redemption look like? 6 months later, Ariella Kane stood on the deck of a Navy ship, watching the sun set over the Arabian Sea. The mission had been a success. Hostages rescued, minimal casualties, perfect execution. She provided overwatch from a position most snipers would have considered impossible. 800 meters, moving target, night conditions, but she'd made the shot. And then the next one, and the one after that. Hayes had called it beautiful. Webb had called it showing off. She'd called it doing her job. But inside, she knew it was more than that. It was proof, evidence that she could be part of something and still be exceptional, that trusting others didn't make her weak, that belonging didn't mean losing herself. The team gathered on the deck, decompressing after the mission, the way they always did, with bad jokes and worse coffee and the comfortable silence of people who'd been through hell together and come out the other side. Someone asked about her first solo mission as a ghost. She told them, not the sanitized version, the real one, about the fear, the isolation, the way she'd convinced herself that distance was strength. They listened without judgment, without trying to fix her or change her mind, just hearing her story the way she'd heard theirs over the past 6 months. Equal, human. When she finished, Webb said quietly, "You're not that person anymore." She looked at him, at the team, at Hayes standing by the rail. "No," she agreed, "I'm not." That night, lying in her bunk, she thought about Jackson, about the promise she'd made over his body. No more silence, no more losses because she didn't speak up. She'd kept that promise on that mountain, and she'd kept it every day since. But she'd also learned something Jackson had tried to tell her before he died, that honoring the fallen didn't mean withdrawing from life. It meant living it fully, with people, with purpose, with all the risk and pain and joy that came from caring about something beyond yourself. The next morning, they flew home to Virginia. The team dispersed to families and friends and lives outside the military. Ariella went to the beach, her spot, the one she'd claimed in those early weeks when everything felt overwhelming. She wasn't alone. Hayes was there, looking out at the ocean. He didn't turn when she approached, didn't seem surprised, just made room for her to stand beside him. They were quiet for a long time. Then he said, "You've come a long way in 6 months." "So have we all." "True," he glanced at her. "You ever think about that day on the mountain?" "Every day." "Me too," he smiled slightly. "Best worst decision I ever made, coming after you." She thought about that, about all the moments that had followed from that one choice. The surgery, the recovery, the training, the missions, the slow, painful process of learning to trust again. "I'm glad you did," she said, "even if I didn't know it at the time." "Yeah, well," Hayes turned to face her fully. "That's the thing about family. Sometimes they make decisions for you, even when you think you don't want them to. Family, the word sat strange on her tongue, but not wrong. Is that what we are? That's what we've always been. You just needed time to see it. Ariella looked out at the ocean, at the waves rolling in endless rhythm against the shore. She thought about the person she'd been 6 months ago, the ghost, the loner, the woman who'd convinced herself that caring was weakness. That person was gone, or maybe not gone, just transformed, evolved, healed. She'd spent 2 years as a ghost, watching the world from a distance, convinced that isolation was the price of never losing anyone again, but standing there with Hayes, with the team, with the possibility of connection spreading out before her like the ocean, she understood something fundamental. The only way to truly honor the fallen is to keep living, not just surviving, but actually living, with people, with purpose, with commitment. Jackson would have approved. More than that, he would have demanded it. A few other team members started arriving. Webb with his terrible coffee, others with stories from the night before. They gathered around naturally, easily, including her without thinking about it, because that's what families did. Ariella found herself smiling, not the careful, controlled expression she'd perfected in her ghost days, but something real, something genuine. Hayes caught it, raised an eyebrow. What? Just thinking, she gestured at the group, about how different things are now. Better different or worse different? Better, definitely better. Webb walked over, handed her a cup of coffee. First round is always on the new member, right? That's tradition. That's absolutely not tradition, Hayes said. You're just cheap. Can it be both? Webb grinned. Ariella laughed. The sound still felt new, still felt strange, but it also felt right. I'll buy the first round, she said, but I'm not carrying anyone home. Fair deal, Hayes agreed. They stood there on the beach, Team 9, family, watching the sun climb higher, burning off the morning mist, the day spreading out before them with all its possibility and risk and promise. Somewhere out there were other ghosts, other watchers in the shadows, other people who'd chosen solitude over connection. Ariella had been one of them. Maybe she still was in some ways. But she was also something new now, something better. She was part of a team, and that, she was starting to think, might be the most important shot she'd ever taken. Not the impossible 800-meter kill in perfect conditions, not the life-saving intervention on a mountain, but the decision to stay, to trust, to let people in, to stop being a ghost and start being human again. Webb made another joke. Someone laughed. The conversation flowed around her, natural, easy, and for the first time in years, Ariella didn't feel separate from it, didn't feel like she was watching life happen from behind a scope. She was living it, with all the mess and complexity and beauty that came with being connected to other people. Hayes caught her eye, smiled. She smiled back. No words needed, just understanding, the kind that comes from shared experience, from mutual respect, from knowing that someone will be there when you need them, and that you'll be there for them too. That's what team meant, that's what family meant. And after 2 years of running from it, Ariella had finally found her way home. The waves kept rolling, the sun kept climbing, and somewhere in the middle of it all, a woman who'd spent too long in the shadows finally stepped into the light. Not because she had to, but because she chose to. Because sometimes, the bravest thing you can do isn't pulling the trigger. It's letting someone stand beside you when you do. It's trusting that you don't have to face the darkness alone. It's understanding that strength comes not from isolation, but from connection. Sometimes dignity doesn't speak, it simply acts. And sometimes the most powerful action is allowing yourself to be part of something bigger than yourself, to care, to trust, to belong. Ariella Kane had learned that lesson the hard way, on a mountain, in a hospital, on a beach in Virginia, but she'd learned it, and she carried it with her now, not as a burden, but as a gift. the gift of second chances, of redemption, of coming home.